Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. My heels clicked against the marble floor, louder than I remembered. It had been almost 10 years since I last set foot inside my father's estate in Napa Valley. Still smelled like expensive leather and judgment. I'm Camilla Hart, 38 years old, Director of Emergency Disease Response for the federal government. And tonight, I was just another pawn in my father's kingdom, here for his 70th birthday gala, nothing more. The ballroom glittered with champagne flutes and diamonds. Men with cufflinks worth more than my car laughed too loudly. Women in silk gowns complimented each other with their teeth bared like wolves. I recognized maybe half the faces, mostly from the covers of business magazines or biotech panels. The other half, well, they all looked like my father, perfectly pressed and utterly hollow. I wasn't staying long. I had planned to shake hands, nod politely, and leave before the cake was cut. Just enough to say I showed up. Camilla? I turned, and there he was. Victor, my older brother. Same tailored arrogance, different suit. He looked me over like I was a paper cutout. Well, well, he said, lifting his glass. The field medic returns. I smiled tightly. Nice to see you too, Vic. Didn't expect you'd make it, what with the viral outbreaks and mudslides. Or is it volcanoes now? He said, loud enough that a few heads turned. Or maybe it's just another day patching up the third world. The people around us chuckled politely. My fingers curled slightly at my side. I go where I'm needed, I said. Victor took a step closer. You've got quite the resume now. Director of whatever. That's impressive, Cam. Really. He grinned wider. You ever miss real science? Or do you like handing out masks and giving press briefings? He was baiting me. I knew that. And I also knew my father, probably standing nearby with a scotch and his practiced smirk, was watching this unfold like theater. Because that's what this place always was, a performance. Victor raised his voice slightly, tapping his glass for attention. Hey everyone, Camilla's here. She's been saving the world, one clinic at a time. He looked right at me. You should tell them a story, something with blood. Or cholera? You know, the glamorous stuff. I heard polite laughter ripple through the guests. A few looked uncomfortable. Most didn't. I should have walked away. Let it go. That was the plan. But something inside me, the part of me that used to sit at the same table being told I'd never measure up to Victor's GPA or Dad's expectations, stood up instead. I gave him a soft smile. You want a story? I asked. He blinked. I stepped forward. I'll give you one. And just like that, the room quieted. Something shifted in the air. Maybe they thought I'd joke or cry. But I wasn't doing either. I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. I stepped forward, heels silent now, each breath measured. Victor's grin was still plastered across his face, but there was a flicker of something else behind his eyes now. Hesitation, maybe? I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I looked out over the sea of dresses and tuxedos and began to speak. Field report, Region 9, Site Delta, March 12th. Estimated cases, 347. Confirmed fatalities, 81. Resources on site, insufficient. Oxygen saturation levels in pediatric patients fell below safe threshold within 6 hours. I didn't blink. Community triage initiated at 0900, 5 staff members, 2 functioning IV pumps. We lost power just after noon. I instructed evacuation of the West Wing by foot. 1 nurse, 3 orderlies, 8 volunteers, no security, ambient temperature, 103 degrees. No one moved. Someone had set down their wine glass too hard, and it echoed like a gunshot through the marble room. A girl named Nasira, 7 years old, was the first to seize. We administered the expired sedative anyway. There were no alternatives. She died before the second injection. I paused. Her mother carried her body to the gate and waited 6 hours for someone to tell her what came next. No one ever did. Somewhere in the back, a woman gasped. Not loudly, but enough. Victor looked frozen, lips parted, eyes darting between the guests. I didn't give him the dignity of looking back. Report filed and sealed, I continued. Submitted to Geneva, March 15th. Distribution restricted. But I remember every word. I let the silence settle in then, thick and humming, like the moment just before a fever breaks. Some of them couldn't look at me. Some couldn't look away. And then, From the rear of the room, applause. Slow, deliberate. I turned. An older man stepped forward, tall, grayed at the temples, bow tie crooked. His hands were shaking just slightly. Dr. Faulkner, someone whispered near the bar. Henry Faulkner, epidemiologist, crisis specialist, legend. I hadn't seen him in nearly 6 years. He stopped a few feet from me and nodded. His voice was low, but clear. I was at Site Echo. We picked up a signal on our satellite radio, barely audible. A voice walked our triage team through 4 hours of field response, coordinating 7 tent hospitals across 2 districts. He looked straight at me. That voice was yours. My throat tightened. Victor blinked rapidly, glancing around like he had lost control of a boardroom meeting. Because he had, Faulkner continued. You didn't just save lives, you kept us standing. When the agency transcripts came through, I had your name highlighted. I didn't know what to say. For once, neither did anyone else. A slow murmur filled the room. Confusion, admiration, a bit of fear. Because for the first time tonight, the story wasn't about Victor or our father or the Hart legacy. It was about something real. I didn't thank Faulkner. I just met his eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not for who I came from, but for what I had done. The air outside smelled like lavender and chlorine. My father had spared no expense for the evening, down to imported French roses lining the stone garden path. The guests inside were still murmuring about my speech, some shaken, others intrigued, but I needed a moment away from the performance. I stood beneath a string of hanging lights, the kind that made everything look soft and elegant in photos. It was the first time in years I'd been outside this house without feeling like I was trespassing. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Dr. Hart, came a familiar voice. I turned. It was Faulkner, his jacket now unbuttoned, his expression different, quieter. The man who had stood in front of world leaders and outbreak zones now looked almost unsure of himself. You walk like you're still in a war zone, he said, offering a tired smile. Eyes forward, shoulders squared. It's hard to turn off, I replied. He nodded. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a manila folder, thick and slightly bent at the edges. He held it like it was something sacred or dangerous. This isn't for tonight, he said, but it has to start tonight. I took the folder and the weight of it hit me before I even opened it. What is it? Procurement logs, shipment histories, regulatory approvals, some of them rushed, most of them incomplete, all tied to Hart and Knox, all connected to Region 9, Site Delta. My fingers went numb. That's not possible. It is, he said. I've spent the last 3 years piecing it together, quietly, carefully. I didn't want to believe it either. I opened the folder. The first page was a shipping manifest, routine at first glance. But the manufacturer listed was an obscure Hart and Knox subsidiary I didn't recognize. The vaccine lot number at the bottom caught my eye. Batch number HNK113-A9. I knew that number. I had administered that batch, over 300 doses in 1 week. Faulkner pointed to a flagged note in the margin. This lot failed secondary stabilization. The internal report was buried. They shipped it anyway. I flipped through the rest of the pages. Legal loopholes, emergency waivers, signature initials. Half of it was coded, but I'd worked long enough in the public sector to know what I was looking at. How many people? I stopped. I didn't want to finish the question. At least a dozen confirmed fatalities connected to adverse reactions, he said quietly. Possibly more. In isolated areas, no one investigates postmortems too closely. A wind passed through the hedges, and I suddenly felt very cold. I thought it was the terrain, I said. The heat, the power outages. I thought, they let you think that, he cut in. They counted on it. I stared down at the folder again. Faulkner's voice was softer now. You didn't cause this, but they used your face, your name, your silence. He paused. I'm sorry. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just stared at that folder like it might catch fire. Victor's cheap jab in the ballroom didn't matter anymore. My father's legacy dinners, the magazine covers, none of it mattered. This wasn't about image. This was about blood. I closed the folder. They buried this, I said. Faulkner nodded, but not deep enough. I didn't go home after the gala. I didn't sleep either. By sunrise, I was in the corner of a research lab at Stanford, the one that still had my name on a grant wall somewhere. I told the department assistant I needed the archives. He didn't ask why. He knew better. The folder Faulkner had handed me sat open beside my laptop. Dozens of pages, scanned invoices, shipment logs, government exemptions stamped in a blur of initials and acronyms. They meant nothing alone, but together, they were a thread begging to be pulled. I started with the vaccine lot number, HNK 113A9, cross-referenced it with regional shipment data, found it in 3 separate distributions, Uganda, Myanmar, and Region 9, where I'd been posted, all marked emergency clearance, all signed off within a 48-hour window. Too fast, no field verification, no follow-up. I opened another document, internal email chain from a Hart and Knox vice president. Language scrubbed, vague, but buried between lines about margin constraints and optics. I found a forwarded message, just 5 words. Run it through anyway. TH, my father's initials. I stared at it, heart like a metronome in my chest. I'd seen that sign off 100 times. On birthday cards, on wire transfers, on every quarterly press release where he waxed poetic about ethical science. I clicked into the metadata. The message was real, undeniably his. I kept digging. That morning blurred into afternoon, into evening. My phone buzzed a few times, calls from numbers I didn't save anymore. I ignored them. There were memos from their marketing team, tweaking efficacy language. Trial data spreadsheets where entire rows had been deleted. A pre-approval report altered mid-transmission, reducing adverse effects by half. One line stuck out like glass in my throat. Stabilizer replacement approved for cost efficiency. No field retest required. No retest. I remembered those clinics, the children trembling through their fever dreams, the mothers asking why the medicine didn't work, and me, telling them with full conviction that they were receiving the best care science could offer. God, it wasn't the heat. It wasn't the terrain or the isolation or the chaos of triage. It was a shortcut, a profit margin. I sat back in the metal chair and let the nausea wash over me. My father had sent poison under the banner of urgency, and I, unwittingly, had delivered it. Faulkner had said they buried it. He was right. But what I held now wasn't a grave. It was a trail, one I could follow. I leaned forward and began copying everything to a secure drive. Every email, every spreadsheet, every crooked signature. They'd used my face to shield the damage. Now I was going to use my name to drag it into the light. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever I was before that night, daughter, doctor, pawn, I wasn't that anymore. Now I was the fuse. The elevator ride up to the executive floor of Hart and Knox was short, but it felt like descending into a different kind of hell. Sleek marble, frosted glass, and that sterile scent of polished money. The receptionist barely glanced at me before buzzing me through. Victor was waiting in the boardroom, hands in his pockets, blazer unbuttoned. The room behind him looked like a showroom. Modern art, skyline view, perfectly arranged bottles of still and sparkling water. Everything just so. "Cam," he said like we were meeting for coffee. "Didn't expect you to come in person." I didn't sit. I dropped the folder on the glass table between us. He gave it a cursory glance, then met my eyes. "Ah, so that's what this is." "You knew," I said. "You signed off on the shipment." "I signed a lot of things," he replied flatly. "That's what happens when you're in charge of operations. This batch, HNK 113-A9, it was defective. Stabilizer degradation, no retest. You knew people would use it anyway." He shrugged. "We were facing delays. The board was panicking. The alternatives weren't ready. It was a calculated risk." "Calculated?" I repeated, my voice low. 12 people are confirmed dead. Dozens more might be. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet, Victor. I saw them. I held some of them." He looked away for a second, not long. "You don't understand how this works. The public expects miracles, Camilla. They expect a vaccine, a treatment, a solution, yesterday. If we pause to test every last detail, people scream about inaction. If we move fast, they scream about oversight." I leaned forward. "You didn't move fast. You moved cheap." Victor's jaw tightened. "Don't act like I planned this. I didn't design the supply chain. I didn't approve the formulation change. I was handed a stack of panic reports and told to keep the brand intact." "By who?" He didn't answer. just stared past me, jaw clenched. "Dad?" I said. Silence. I took a slow breath. "You wanted to be him so badly. You didn't care what it cost." That hit. His posture faltered for a moment. He looked older suddenly, less polished executive, more scared kid in a suit that didn't quite fit. "You think this was easy for me?" he snapped. "I knew it was wrong. I knew what I was signing. But if I didn't, someone else would. And it wouldn't be just one batch. It would be the whole goddamn line." I shook my head. "You think you were protecting the company. You weren't. You were burying bodies under a logo." He didn't respond. I picked up the folder again and tapped it once against the table. "The law's coming. Faulkner and I are turning everything over. You have a choice, Victor. Help us. Or be buried by this." He looked at me like he wanted to say something. Maybe defend himself. Maybe apologize. But all he did was nod. Once, sharp. I turned and walked out. And this time, no one tried to stop me. I hadn't thought about Jonah Ruiz in a long time. Not until I started organizing the evidence with Faulkner and saw the word pediatric scrawled on a shipping form. It was like the air left the room. Back then, I was stationed at a makeshift clinic in Region 9, half-tent, half-broken brick compound. We had generators that cut out daily and a dwindling stack of supplies we rationed like gold. That was where I met Jonah, fresh out of med school, 25. Bright-eyed and always scribbling notes into his sweat-stained field journal. He had this way of making everyone around him feel seen. I once found him braiding a little girl's hair while her mother cried beside her cot. He didn't speak her language, but somehow it didn't matter. I'd like to say I mentored him. The truth was, I kept my distance. I was exhausted, focused, tunnel-visioned. We were losing 2 patients a day, sometimes more. And then the quake hit. It wasn't massive, but enough to turn the clinic into rubble in less than 10 seconds. I'd been in the courtyard. Jonah had just finished his shift. We both heard the rumble. We both saw the West Wing tilt like a house of cards. And Jonah ran. He didn't hesitate, didn't look for backup. He sprinted toward the collapsing structure and disappeared through the swaying doorway. I never saw him come out. 2 hours later, they pulled his body from the wreckage. He'd reached the pediatric ward, shielded 2 of the children with his own body. 1 survived. For years, I told myself I'd led the rescue response, that I coordinated the triage under pressure, but I hadn't run into that building. He had, and now I knew what sedative had been used in that ward. Faulkner had flagged it, diazolene HN5, mislabeled by a Hart and Knox subsidiary, labeled as pediatric approved. In reality, it had failed efficacy trials. Some batches were dangerously under-concentrated. Jonah had administered those doses thinking they'd help. Instead, they did nothing. One of the kids went into full respiratory distress. Another seized. And still, he went in. I sat at my desk, hands over my mouth, trying not to scream. This wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't just corporate negligence or a pile of redacted memos. This was Jonah, his handwriting still in the margins of my old field logs, his goofy jokes, his stubborn faith that we could make things better out there. He died doing what I hadn't had the courage to do. And the company my family built had quietly erased any link between his death and their product. They hadn't just failed him. They had used him, turned him into a statistic, a silent casualty in a quarterly earnings report. I printed his name in bold at the top of the case file. Then I wrote something beneath it. He was the one who ran in. I sat back and stared at the page until the ink dried. Jonah wasn't coming back, but his story would. And this time, it wouldn't be footnoted or buried. It would be heard. It took 3 encrypted drives, 2 offsite storage servers, and 1 very silent morning in Faulkner's home office to prepare the submission. We sat across from each other, stacks of printed files and flash drives between us like a funeral altar. "No going back after this," Faulkner said quietly, eyes scanning a final checklist. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I answered. And it was true. I felt hollow, but certain, like the kind of stillness that comes after a fever breaks. We uploaded the compiled report to the Federal Health Oversight Agency's secure portal, sectioned by evidentiary categories: procurement fraud, data manipulation, regulatory bypasses, fatal product batch codes. Every page signed, every file time-stamped. When I clicked the final submit button, the silence afterward rang louder than applause. An hour later, my phone lit up, not with congratulations, with fury. First, an email from the Hart and Knox board. Reckless accusations. Confidential property. potential legal exposure. Then the calls started. Block numbers, unknown numbers, one after the other piling up like vultures on a power line. I didn't answer a single one. By sunset, my name was on 3 business news alerts and a medical ethics blog. Daughter of Hart and Knox founder accuses family company of criminal negligence. The word traitor showed up in a thread on a biotech investors forum. Someone posted my home address. Another mentioned bad things happening to whistleblowers. Victor hadn't called. Neither had my father. But my mother finally did. I almost didn't pick up. "Camilla," she said immediately, her voice low and panicked, like she was hiding in a closet. "Tell me this isn't true." "It's all true," I said. I could picture her closing her eyes, pressing fingers to her temple in that familiar dramatic pose. "You're tearing the family apart." "No, Mom," I said softly. "The family did that years ago. I'm just showing the cracks. There has to be another way. Quietly, internally. Your father built everything from the ground up. On what? Bad science and buried bodies?" My voice rose despite me. "He used my name, my face. He let people die, and then celebrated it over champagne." She was crying now or pretending to. "Sweetheart, you're going to destroy us." "No," I said. "You destroyed yourselves. I'm just the one who stopped pretending." There was silence. Then the click of disconnection. That night, I locked my doors, closed every curtain. The air felt heavier, like it knew what was coming. My inbox filled with hate. Journalists called my lab. My assistant quit. But I slept. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Because guilt keeps you up. But truth? Truth has weight, yes, but it also has gravity. And now it was pulling everything into the light. The courthouse didn't feel like justice. It felt like waiting. Long corridors with dull carpeting and worn-out benches. Men in suits whispering. Reporters loitering near the front steps like they were waiting for a celebrity scandal, not a corporate manslaughter case. Day 1 of the trial, the courtroom filled faster than expected. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the energy buzzed anyway. Everyone knew what this was. Hart and Knox Biotech, the once invincible empire. Now on trial. My father sat at the defendant's table, jaw tight, fingers laced in front of him. He wore his best Navy suit, the one he used for gala photos and investor meetings. He looked smaller than I remembered. Victor sat a row behind him, pale, silent. Faulkner was sworn in first. The prosecution walked him through the documents, pages he and I had compiled over weeks of long, bitter nights. Procurement logs, falsified trial data, emails that showed shipment approvals pushed through without safety checks. Then came the flagged reports, highlighted risks, early warnings, ignored findings. Faulkner's voice never shook, but when he reached the sedative batch list, his tone dropped. This lot, diazolene HN5, was mislabeled as pediatric grade. In truth, it failed 3 out of 4 efficacy benchmarks. Internal memos prove that Hart and Knox moved forward anyway. He looked across the courtroom, right at my father. And they did so knowingly. Murmurs rippled through the room. The judge banged his gavel twice. My father's lawyer didn't object. He just wrote something down. When they called me to the stand, the room got quieter. No cameras, no flashing bulbs. But I could feel the entire building listening. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. Then I sat, adjusted the mic, and opened the file in front of me. "I served as a field coordinator in Region 9 during a Category 4 outbreak," I began. "We lost dozens of patients in the first week. Our supplies came directly from Hart and Knox's humanitarian subsidiary, Everkind. One of those shipments included the vaccine batch HNK113-A9 and several units of diazolene HN-5. I paused. Both have since been identified as faulty, undertested, rushed. I unfolded a piece of paper, a copy of the triage log from the day the clinic collapsed. One of the patients was a 7-year-old boy named Nabil. He was administered the sedative diazolene HN5. His reaction was delayed. His vitals dropped too fast. He never regained consciousness. A moment passed. Then I looked straight ahead. There was another name on that log. Jonah Ruiz, medical intern, 25 years old. I felt something twist in my chest. Jonah ran into the west wing of the clinic after the first aftershock. While others hesitated, he ran. He shielded 2 children in the pediatric ward. One of them survived. Jonah didn't. The room was so still I could hear the ticking of the courtroom clock. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero looking for glory. He just did what needed to be done. I looked down at the slip of paper I held, then slowly raised it. This is the batch number printed on the vial used in that ward, batch number DX2047HN. It matches the Hart and Knox production run. I held it for a beat longer, let the room absorb it. Then I said, the decision to approve and distribute this sedative under false documentation contributed to those deaths. I believe the evidence shows that my father, as chief executive officer, authorized those decisions. My father didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, blank-faced. I folded the paper and set it down. No more performance, just truth, laid bare in fluorescent lighting. And for once, everyone finally heard it. The verdict came on a gray morning in early spring. The judge read the charges one by one: corporate manslaughter, regulatory fraud, conspiracy to obstruct federal oversight. And when he said guilty, my father didn't blink. He just lowered his eyes, hands folded neatly on the defense table as if he were reviewing a quarterly report. The sentencing was swift. 15 years in federal custody, minimum security, no bail. Victor sat beside me in the gallery. He didn't speak, just kept rubbing his hands together like they itched. After Faulkner's testimony and mine, Victor had surrendered over 60 gigabytes of internal documents. It cut his sentence down. He'd likely served 2 years in a monitored facility. He didn't thank me for that. The headlines rolled in fast. Biotech giant crumbles under scandal. CEO convicted in vaccine cover-up. Whistleblower daughter testifies against family. Hart and Knox stock plummeted overnight. The board disbanded within days. Investors fled. The company's assets were frozen, later liquidated. Labs shuttered. Distribution lines halted. Offices once filled with quiet power emptied out like the last breath of a dying empire. I should have felt relief, or victory. Instead, I felt finished. Then the letter came. Delivered by courier, a simple white envelope. Inside was a typed note, no signature. I've transferred $10 million from my private account to establish the Jonah Ruiz Medical Ethics Foundation. You may direct it as you see fit. No apology, no explanation, just money. Faulkner and I confirmed the transfer. It was real, irrevocable. When I told Faulkner, he shook his head slowly. He never met the boy, never said his name. I don't think he ever will, I said. I didn't reply to the letter. I didn't visit my father in prison, but I filed the paperwork. Established the foundation in Jonah's name, a nonprofit to fund ethical review panels, especially for field medicine in crisis zones. It wouldn't bring Jonah back, wouldn't undo what was done, but it could keep someone else from becoming the next silent footnote. One afternoon, a few weeks after the sentencing, I visited the old Hart and Knox headquarters. It was already half stripped, glass doors removed, logos scraped off the front steps. A demolition crew was waiting on final permits. Victor was standing out front, staring up at the empty windows like he was trying to see a ghost. Feels weird, he muttered when I approached. Yeah, I said. It does. He didn't look at me. You think he ever really believed what he said about saving lives? I took a long breath. I think he believed the story, just not the cost. Victor nodded slowly, then walked away. Didn't say goodbye. I stood there a while longer. Let the wind rattle the caution tape. Let the silence settle in the hollow where an empire used to be. The foundation had a name now, a mission, a future. I didn't forgive my father, but I made sure Jonah's name would outlive him. The invitation came tucked between a pile of nonprofit mail and a legal form renewal. Handwritten envelope, Ugandan postage. Inside, a letter from a global trauma recovery initiative, asking if I'd considered joining their board as a medical advisor. They ran mobile clinics across post-conflict regions. Field triage, yes, but something different too. Music therapy, rhythm groups, sound as medicine. It was unlike anything I'd done before. I left the letter sitting on my kitchen counter for days. Faulkner finally asked about it during one of our check-in calls. You going to take it? I don't know, I said. It's not my world. He laughed. Not yet. I told him I didn't play an instrument. He said, it's not about what you play. It's what you carry through the note. That stuck with me, so I said yes. The first time I stepped into one of their clinics, it smelled like earth and sunlight and something else I hadn't felt in years: hope. The therapy room wasn't fancy. A few drums, handmade flutes, a cracked guitar missing its low E string. But the kids there, refugees, orphans, trauma survivors, were smiling. They didn't know my last name. Didn't care. They just handed me a tambourine and made room in the circle. It didn't erase what happened, but it rewired something. There was life here, unpolished, unprofitable, and real. Months later, I visited the prison. I didn't tell anyone. Not Faulkner. Not Victor. Not even my therapist. The visitation room smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. My father was already seated, dressed in a standard-issue tan jumpsuit. He looked older, not fragile, just settled. He didn't rise when I sat. "I heard you turned down the speaking circuit," he said. "I'm done talking to rooms that only listen to themselves." He nodded once, as if he understood that more than I expected. "They approved the foundation name," he added. "The Ruiz family wrote a letter. Said thank you." I didn't answer. He leaned back slightly. "You always thought strength was about defiance, but it wasn't." I met his eyes. Number. It was about knowing when to stop protecting the wrong things. He was quiet after that. No apology, no pleading. He looked like a man watching a tide roll in and knowing he'd built his house too close to the water. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About you, about what mattered." I stood. "I know." I left without looking back. Outside, the air was dry and still. I sat in my car for a while, hands on the wheel, heart steady. There was a song playing softly on the radio, just a melody, no lyrics. I listened until the last note faded. Not defiance, not grief, just something honest. That afternoon, I flew to Nairobi for my first field site with the nonprofit. This time, I didn't wear a white coat. I carried a duffel bag, a tablet loaded with intake forms, and a journal. At the airport, a little girl offered me a sticker. I stuck it to my sleeve. When I stepped into the next clinic, the kids cheered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. My voice, finally, was my own.